Hi, ABC School. For those who don't know us, thank you so much for allowing A&M Education Solutions to help respond to what's going on right now.
My husband Michael and I founded this organization to really help
Mhm.
provide schools, districts, nonprofits with innovative and justice centered solutions. We root all of our ideas in justice, excellence, and innovation, and we're super excited to share our findings with you today and propose some great solutions to you.
All right, before we dive in, we first want to go through some of the facts of what's going on with ABC School that help for us to determine those action plans for those key issues. First, parents want a policy response to a weapon and a resulting injury at the school, rightfully so. A family reported an incident of cyberbullying with no response from ABC School to the media. The school has been also cited while all this is going on for disproportionately high suspensions and expulsions of students with disabilities. And the student who committed the cyberbullying offense has an IEP. Lastly, our families are wondering what's going to happen for their children, especially those with exceptionalities, given all the COVID-19 learning loss we know has happened for ABC School as well as across the country. So we always like to look at the issues first on the legal side, but also on the leadership side. So first, in terms of the policy response to a weapon, we know there are a couple of legal precedents that have already occurred. The Fourth Amendment bans unreasonable search and seizures for everyone. More specifically, within New Jersey versus TLO, student searches have to be reasonable at its inception and permissible in scope, meaning reasonable to begin with and throughout that search. Students may search, schools may search students, but they don't have to search students. And we know Safford versus Redding says that searches should not be highly intrusive. On the leadership end, we have to think about some key questions. Does ABC School have a predetermined and communicated policy for searches? Are those policies controlled for biases and promote equity? Also, are there any prevention efforts that are going on to promote student safety? Our response action plan for this key issue is threefold. First, we have to design a school search policy, outline illegal items, and communicate it to all stakeholders. Within that search policy, ABC School, you have to ban drug tests, strip searches, random searches, and pat downs because we know that we cannot promote equity in those policies and control for biases. And we need to communicate that rationale to our stakeholders, especially our parents. We can implement metal detectors, but there should be a phase interim approach, meaning that you can begin with metal detectors every day. And as you find that you're not finding anything, you can begin to pull back that metal detector process because that means that it's not a reasonable search anymore. We can strengthen relationships between staff and students and make sure we're implementing restorative practices for students found with illegal items. And that's how we can create a clear search policy that centers equity for ABC School.
Our second issue to deal with here is this incident of cyberbullying. And while we know that there are no Supreme Court cases
Mhm.
or rulings on free speech on social media yet for students and what the role schools can play in that, we do know there are two key cases around student free speech in schools that we can leverage here to have a better understanding. So we know that Tinker allows schools to punish kids for a significant disruption or an invasion of other kids' rights. And we know that Bethel versus Frazier allows schools to punish kids for things that are vulgar or obscene or indecent. Lastly, on the legal side, we know that we have a duty of care against negligence and that we have to take reasonable steps to protect our kids from harm. Thinking of those things, I thought of two important leadership questions here. Does ABC School have a plan in place to respond to issues of cyberbullying now that kids all have social media and those phones? And then what actionable steps have you all taken as a school to build a safe and inclusive school culture? Those legal and leadership questions led me to three kind of big ideas here for your action plan. One, to revise your student handbook to address cyberbullying so that every kid understands the consequences and that is messaged to kids and to families. Also, to develop a system to investigate and respond to cyberbullying so that parents, families, and kids understand the length of the investigation, the tools that are used to investigate, what disciplinary action is taken, and then how they will be informed of those actions. And lastly, given that Cynthia has been so negatively impacted by this incident of cyberbullying, how can the school community provide her with counseling and resources so she can successfully re-enter your school community?
On the other end, we also want to think about the disproportionate consequences that's happening, specifically for students with IEPs and generally at the school. The 2018 GOA report tells us that higher rates of suspensions are happening across this country for students with disabilities and Black students, and we have to think about that intersection. Goss versus Lopez establishes that students are required due process with any suspensions. IDEA tells us that on the 11th day, FAPE has to be happening for long-term suspensions, and that schools have to consider the manifestation of disabilities, meaning if behaviors are manifestations of disabilities. On the leadership end, we have to think about some different things. What's the root cause of these disproportionate consequences? What positive behavioral interventions and supports happen to mitigate those negative behaviors, and what trends exist in school data? There are three key parts of our response and action plan here. First, develop complete a deep dive of suspension or referral data. We have to look at student demographics and trends in which teachers are submitting referrals and their demographics, and what common behaviors are exhibited that lead to those consequences, because we want to get to the root of this problem. We believe that you all need to implement a whole school PBIS system. Within that, establishing the opportunity for students to engage in social emotional learning and daily morning advisories, including a shift in your handbook to restorative practices, including for those that commented on Cynthia's post and committed parts of those cyberbullying acts, and then to provide teachers with the development in these systems to make sure that actually happening at a high level. For Will specifically, we looked into his plan, and what he did was actually a manifestation of his disability. So we need to ensure that we're providing him with ongoing counseling services, and then we help to restore that relationship with Cynthia. And this is how we root and center our school discipline policies and restoration and support.
Our last key issue here to consider is also rooted in our students with exceptionalities. And we know that FAPE requires all schools to ensure that kids, regardless of virtual, hybrid, or in person, are receiving their services and access to high quality education. On the leadership side of the house, virtual learning has been challenging for everyone. So, what were the plans that were put in place to help our students with disabilities when we went into virtual learning? And now the kids are back in person with us, and we're working to address learning loss and learning gaps. What are your plans to address those issues? We thought of four really important things that could help you with with your current issues. First, get ready for that legal case by pulling all your important documentation from case managers and service providers, especially examples of virtual modifications and accommodations. Secondly, leveraging something like RTI to help identify kids who are dealing with learning loss and learning gaps, and then monitoring their progress. Three, reevaluating your current plan for special education so that you can reallocate time, capacity, and resources of your staff to work with kids who are experiencing the most learning loss, especially our kids with exceptionalities. And last but not least, ensuring that kids with exceptionalities are able to go to some type of summer school program, and maybe reallocating some of your COVID relief funds to that type of programming so that all kids can close those gaps. We truly believe that if you can implement these policies, you're going to have a school that feels much more rooted in equity and justice. And you're going to see that through clear policies that are communicated and that center equity, you're going to see a decrease in your suspension and expulsion rates over the next couple of years, especially for our kids with exceptionalities. You're going to see an increase in student engagement where kids like Cynthia feel like they're a part of your community. You're going to feel this positive restorative school culture that makes both kids like Will and Cynthia both a part of that space, and you're going to avoid some of these legal issues and help to rebrand and revitalize your image to your parents, kids, and community stakeholders.
With that being said, please tell us, what questions do you have? How can we best support you in implementing all of this at your school?